Washington, November 8, 2024. The Federal Reserve raised the benchmark interest rate by 0.25%, marking its fourth increase this year to combat high inflation. The Fed chair stated this measure aims to control rising prices and support economic stability. Marcus Williams stood at the bus stop on a cold Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, wearing his dress blue Marine uniform. The crisp fabric felt foreign against his skin, but he needed the respect it commanded. At 28 years old, Marcus had been struggling to find steady work for months. His construction job had ended when the company downsized, and his savings were running dangerously low. The uniform belonged to his older brother David, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before dying in a car accident 3 years earlier. The idea had started innocently enough. Marcus needed to attend a job interview at a security firm, and he thought the uniform might give him an edge. After all, he reasoned, military experience was highly valued in security work. He had grown up hearing David's stories about Marine training, discipline, and brotherhood. Marcus had absorbed so many details over the years that he felt he could convincingly play the part, at least for one interview. As he waited for the bus, an elderly woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She thanked him for his service and pressed a $20 bill into his hand despite his protests. The genuine gratitude in her voice made Marcus's stomach twist with guilt, but he desperately needed that money for lunch. This small interaction planted a dangerous seed in his mind. The security job interview went better than expected. The hiring manager, a former Army sergeant, was impressed by Marcus's military bearing and the stories he had carefully rehearsed from David's experiences. Marcus found himself embellishing details, describing imaginary deployments and fabricated medals. The interviewer nodded approvingly and promised to call within a week. Walking home from the interview, Marcus encountered more people who wanted to shake his hand and thank him. A restaurant owner insisted on giving him a free meal. A young father pointed him out to his son as a real American hero. Each interaction fed Marcus's growing confidence in his deception, while simultaneously deepening his sense of shame. That evening, Marcus carefully hung the uniform back in David's old room, which their mother had kept exactly as it was when he died. Looking at the photos of his brother in actual combat zones, Marcus felt a complex mixture of guilt and justification. David would have wanted him to succeed, he told himself. He was just borrowing some respect, not hurting anyone. The security company called the next day with a job offer. Marcus accepted immediately, knowing he could drop the military act once he started working. However, his new supervisor mentioned that several clients specifically requested former military personnel for certain assignments. Marcus realized he was trapped in his lie, but the steady paycheck was too important to risk losing. Over the following weeks, Marcus became more comfortable in his role. He studied military protocols online, memorized Marine terminology, and even practiced the proper way to wear the uniform. He told himself he was honoring David's memory by representing the Marines with dignity. The cognitive dissonance was easier to manage when he focused on the positive reactions he received. Marcus began wearing the uniform to community events, charity functions, and local parades. People treated him with a level of respect he had never experienced before. Children looked up to him with admiration. Veterans included him in their circles, sharing stories and inviting him to exclusive gatherings. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he truly belonged somewhere. The deception grew more elaborate as Marcus created an entire fictional military history. He claimed to have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart, and achieved the rank of staff sergeant. He memorized the names of actual battles and locations where David had served, incorporating real details into his fabricated narrative. His performance became so convincing that even he sometimes forgot where the truth ended and the lies began. Marcus's mother noticed the change in her son's demeanor. He carried himself with more confidence and seemed to have found purpose again. When she asked about his newfound success, Marcus told her he was finally living up to David's example. She was proud but puzzled by his sudden transformation, not knowing about the uniform hidden in her deceased son's room. The local community embraced Marcus as a hometown hero. The American Legion invited him to join their post. A local newspaper ran a feature story about his service, though Marcus carefully avoided providing specific details that could be easily verified. He was invited to speak at schools about military service and the importance of defending freedom. As months passed, Marcus's double life became increasingly complex. He had to remember which stories he had told to which people. He researched military regulations, studied combat tactics, and even learned basic first aid to maintain his credibility. The amount of effort required to sustain his deception was exhausting, but the benefits seemed to outweigh the costs. Marcus's guilt was constantly battling with his newfound sense of purpose and belonging. He genuinely wanted to honor veterans and serve his community, even if his methods were dishonest. He convinced himself that he was doing more good than harm, that his presence inspired others to support real veterans and military families. The turning point began when Marcus was invited to participate in a Memorial Day ceremony at the local veterans cemetery. Standing among genuine war heroes holding a flag over David's grave, Marcus felt the full weight of his deception. He was literally standing on his brother's memory while lying about his own service. The irony was crushing, but he was too deep into the lie to find an easy way out. That night, Marcus stared at himself in David's uniform and made a decision that would change everything. He would attend one more event, a large Veterans Day celebration where he had been invited as a guest of honor. After that, he would find a way to gradually fade from the military community and return to his normal life. He had no idea that this final performance would expose him in the most dramatic way possible, in front of the one person who could immediately identify him as a fraud. The Veterans Day celebration was the largest military event in the city's history. Mayor Patricia Henderson had organized a massive parade, followed by a ceremony in the Civic Center, expecting over 5,000 attendees. Marcus received a special invitation to march with the Marine veterans and deliver a speech about service and sacrifice. His stomach churned as he read the invitation, but backing out now would raise too many questions. 3 days before the event, Marcus noticed increased activity around the veterans organizations. Word was spreading that a high-ranking military official would be attending the ceremony. The local Marine recruiter mentioned that a real big shot from Washington was coming to honor the city's veterans. Marcus dismissed this as typical small-town exaggeration, not realizing the significance of what was about to unfold. Marcus spent the weekend perfecting his speech, drawing heavily from David's actual experiences and combining them with stories he had read online. He practiced in front of the mirror, working on his posture and delivery. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was preparing to give a speech about honor and integrity while living a complete lie. On the morning of Veterans Day, Marcus put on David's dress blue uniform for what he promised himself would be the last time. He had decided to announce his retirement from public appearances after this event, citing the need to focus on civilian life. It seemed like a dignified exit strategy that would allow him to fade away without suspicion. The parade route was packed with cheering crowds waving American flags and holding signs thanking veterans for their service. Marcus marched with the Marine contingent, feeling both pride and shame with every step. Children pointed at him excitedly, and adults applauded enthusiastically. He smiled and waved, playing his part perfectly while internally counting down the minutes until his deception could finally end. At the Civic Center, Marcus was seated on the stage with other honored veterans and local dignitaries. The mayor introduced various speakers, building up to what she described as a very special surprise guest. Marcus noticed several men in military uniforms scanning the crowd and speaking into earpieces. Something important was definitely happening, but he was too focused on his upcoming speech to pay much attention. When Mayor Henderson announced the surprise guest, the crowd erupted in applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Robert Morrison, Commanding General of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. A real Marine general was about to take the stage, and Marcus was sitting in the front row wearing a stolen uniform covered in unearned decorations. General Morrison was an imposing figure with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons earned through decades of actual service. He had served multiple combat tours and commanded thousands of Marines. His presence radiated the kind of authentic authority that Marcus had been faking for months. As the general approached the podium, his eyes swept across the assembled veterans, briefly making contact with Marcus. The general's speech was powerful and moving, filled with personal anecdotes about fallen comrades and the sacred bond between Marines. Marcus found himself genuinely inspired despite his terror, remembering why he had always looked up to his brother and the military community. Every word the general spoke highlighted the difference between real service and Marcus's pathetic impersonation. After the speech, local officials began introducing the general to various veterans in attendance. Marcus watched in growing panic as the general moved closer to his section of the stage. He considered making an excuse to leave, but that would have been conspicuous and disrespectful. He was trapped in his seat wearing a lie, about to face the one person who could instantly expose him. When the mayor introduced Marcus as one of our finest local Marine veterans, the general extended his hand with a warm smile. "Semper Fi, Marine. Where did you serve?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stammered out his rehearsed response about Iraq and Afghanistan, mentioning the same units where David had actually served. General Morrison nodded politely, but Marcus noticed the general's eyes examining his uniform with the trained attention of someone who had spent a lifetime in the military. The general's expression remained friendly, but Marcus detected a slight narrowing of his eyes as he took in the details of Marcus's decorations and insignia. "That's an interesting combination of ribbons," the general remarked casually. "I don't see that particular grouping very often." Marcus's heart pounded as he realized he had no idea what the general was referring to. He had simply arranged David's ribbons the way they were displayed in his brother's room, without understanding their significance or proper order. The conversation continued for several more agonizing minutes, with the general asking increasingly specific questions about Marcus's supposed service. Marcus provided vague answers, hoping to deflect attention, but he could sense the general's growing suspicion. Other veterans gathered around to meet the general, inadvertently creating a larger audience for Marcus's impending exposure. General Morrison mentioned a particular battle that had occurred during the time and place where Marcus claimed to have served. "You must have been there for Operation Steel Curtain," the general said. "That was a tough one. I remember the Marines from your unit were particularly heroic during that engagement." Marcus nodded and agreed, not realizing he was walking into a trap. The general's next question came like a lightning strike. "What was your MOS?" Marcus had no idea what MOS meant, let alone what his supposed military occupational specialty should have been. He mumbled something about being in logistics, hoping the general would move on to someone else. Instead, the general's eyes became laser-focused on Marcus's uniform. "You know," General Morrison said in a voice that was beginning to carry an edge, "I'm having trouble placing some of these ribbons. Would you mind explaining how you earned this particular decoration?" He pointed to a ribbon on Marcus's chest that Marcus couldn't even name. The circle of veterans around them had grown larger, and Marcus realized that dozens of people were now listening to every word. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to come up with an explanation. His mouth went dry, and his carefully rehearsed story suddenly seemed to evaporate from his memory. He was about to be exposed as a fraud in front of hundreds of people, including real veterans who had sacrificed so much for their country. The weight of his deception was about to come crashing down in the most public and humiliating way possible. Marcus's world began to collapse as General Morrison's questions became more pointed and specific. The general's trained eye had detected numerous irregularities in Marcus's uniform that no real Marine would have made. The ribbon rack was arranged incorrectly. The service stripes were wrong for someone claiming his length of service, and several decorations were simply incompatible with the timeline Marcus had provided. "This Purple Heart," General Morrison said, his voice now carrying unmistakable authority. "When exactly did you receive this?" Marcus stammered something about an IED explosion, but the general interrupted him. "The thing is, Marine, the citation data for this decoration doesn't match your supposed service dates. And this combat action ribbon, you claim you earned it in Iraq, but you also said you served in Afghanistan during that same period." The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing the tension in the air. Other veterans began to look more closely at Marcus, some of them starting to frown as they too noticed inconsistencies in his appearance and story. Marcus felt like a deer caught in headlights, knowing that his deception was unraveling, but unable to find a way to escape the situation gracefully. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion," Marcus said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. But General Morrison was just getting started. With the methodical precision of a career military officer, he began pointing out additional problems with Marcus's uniform and story. The general's voice remained professional, but there was steel underneath his words. "You know what really concerns me, son?" the general continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "It's not just the uniform irregularities or the conflicting stories. It's the disrespect you're showing to every Marine who actually earned these decorations. Do you have any idea what real Marines went through to earn a Purple Heart? Do you understand the sacrifice represented by these ribbons you're wearing?" The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Several veterans in the crowd began to murmur among themselves, and Marcus could see the recognition dawning on their faces. He was being exposed as a fraud in the most public way possible, surrounded by real heroes who had actually served their country with honor. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His carefully constructed lies were crumbling under the weight of the general's expertise and authority. He could feel the eyes of hundreds of people boring into him, waiting for an explanation that he couldn't provide. The shame was overwhelming, made worse by the knowledge that he was standing in his dead brother's uniform while being called out for stolen valor, just as General Morrison was about to deliver what would surely be the final blow to Marcus's deception. Something unexpected happened. The general's eyes suddenly focused on a small tattoo visible just above Marcus's collar. It was a simple design that Marcus had gotten years earlier to honor his brother's memory. The eagle, globe, and anchor symbol of the Marine Corps with David's initials underneath. The general paused mid-sentence, his expression changing from accusatory to puzzled. He stepped closer to Marcus, examining the tattoo more carefully. "Where did you get that tattoo?" he asked, his tone suddenly different. Marcus, desperate to provide any distraction from his crumbling lies, explained that he had gotten it to honor his brother David Williams, who had died in a car accident after serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. General Morrison's entire demeanor shifted dramatically. His eyes widened with what appeared to be recognition, and he took another step closer to Marcus. "David Williams? Staff Sergeant David Williams from 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines?" Marcus nodded, surprised that the general seemed to know his brother's name and unit. "Wait a minute," the general said, his voice now filled with a completely different kind of intensity. "Are you telling me you're David Williams's brother? The David Williams who saved my life in Helmand Province?" The crowd around them erupted in murmurs of confusion and interest. Marcus stared at the general in shock, having no idea what he was talking about. The general continued, his voice growing stronger and more emotional. "Your brother dragged me out of a burning Humvee after we hit an IED. I was unconscious, and if he hadn't risked his own life to pull me out, I would have died when the vehicle exploded. David Williams is the reason I'm standing here today." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of being exposed as a fraud, he was suddenly being connected to his brother's genuine heroism in a way he had never imagined. The general's hostility had transformed into something approaching reverence, but Marcus knew his own deception remained unchanged. "I tried to track down your brother after that deployment," General Morrison continued, "but by the time I got back stateside and could follow up, I learned he had been killed in that accident. I never got the chance to thank him properly or to make sure his family knew what a hero he was." The general's voice was thick with emotion as he recounted the story. The crowd around them was now completely captivated by this unexpected turn of events. What had begun as an exposure of stolen valor was becoming a tribute to a fallen hero. Marcus found himself in an impossible position. He was still wearing a stolen uniform and living a lie, but he was also representing his brother's genuine sacrifice and heroism. General Morrison looked directly into Marcus's eyes and said, "Your brother saved my life, son. He was one of the finest Marines I ever served with, but that doesn't explain why you're wearing his uniform and claiming his service as your own." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The general had connected the dots. He knew David was a hero, but he also knew Marcus was an imposter. The moment of truth had arrived in the most dramatic and unexpected way possible. Marcus was faced with a choice: continue his lies in front of a general who had been saved by his brother, or confess his deception and face the consequences. The weight of his brother's genuine heroism made his own fraud seem even more shameful and inexcusable. The crowd waited in tense silence for Marcus's response, unaware that they were witnessing the climax of a deception that was about to shatter in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as Marcus stood frozen between his lies and the truth. General Morrison's penetrating gaze seemed to see right through him, and Marcus knew that any attempt to continue his deception would be futile. The weight of his brother's genuine heroism, now revealed in such a dramatic way, made his own fraud feel even more despicable. Marcus began, his voice cracking with emotion. The hundreds of people gathered around them waited expectantly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marcus looked down at the uniform he was wearing, his brother's uniform, and felt the crushing weight of shame and guilt that he had been carrying for months. "I never served," Marcus finally whispered, the words barely audible. But in the hushed crowd, his confession carried clearly to everyone present. "I never served in the Marines. This is my brother's uniform. I've been lying to everyone for months." The admission felt like a physical weight being lifted from his shoulders, even as he braced himself for the inevitable backlash. The crowd erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Some veterans in the audience shouted accusations of stolen valor, their voices filled with righteous indignation. Marcus had expected this reaction, but it still hit him like a tsunami of anger and disappointment. He had betrayed the trust of an entire community that had embraced him as one of their own. General Morrison raised his hand for silence, his authoritative presence immediately commanding attention from the crowd. "Before anyone says another word," the general announced in a voice that carried across the entire civic center, "I want you all to hear the rest of this story." The crowd quieted, though the tension in the air remained palpable. "This young man may not have served in the Marines," the general continued, "but he is the brother of one of the finest Marines I ever knew. Staff Sergeant David Williams didn't just save my life. He saved the lives of 3 other Marines that day. He ran back into enemy fire to pull wounded men to safety, and he did it without hesitation or thought for his own safety." The general's voice grew stronger as he continued his tribute to David. "Your brother earned every decoration he received and more. He was recommended for the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. He embodied everything we hope to instill in Marines: courage, honor, and selfless service to others." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he listened to the general describe his brother's heroism in detail. These were stories he had never heard, acts of courage that went far beyond anything David had ever told his family. Marcus realized that his brother had been even more of a hero than he had ever known, which made his own deception feel even more shameful. "But here's what I want everyone in this crowd to understand," General Morrison said, his voice now addressing the angry veterans and spectators. "This young man didn't steal valor for personal gain or to deceive people maliciously. He was carrying on his brother's legacy in the only way he knew how. He was honoring a fallen hero, even if he went about it the wrong way." The general turned back to Marcus, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Son, what you did was wrong. There's no question about that. Wearing a uniform you didn't earn and claiming service you didn't perform is a serious offense. But I can see in your eyes that you know that. I can see the guilt and shame you've been carrying." Marcus nodded through his tears, unable to speak. The general continued, "Your brother would not have wanted you to live a lie in his memory. David Williams was a man of integrity, and he would have wanted you to find your own way to honor his service, not by pretending to be something you're not." The crowd was now listening intently to the general's words, their initial anger beginning to give way to a more complex understanding of the situation. Marcus could see confusion and conflicting emotions on the faces around him. Some people were still clearly angry, while others seemed to be grappling with the human complexity of what they had just witnessed. "I'm not excusing what you did," General Morrison said to Marcus, "but I am saying that I understand why you did it. Losing a brother who was a hero, struggling to find your place in the world, wanting to honor his memory. These are understandable motivations, even if your methods were wrong." The general then did something that surprised everyone present. He reached out and shook Marcus's hand. "Your brother saved my life," he said quietly, "and for that your family will always have my respect and gratitude. But now you need to find your own way to serve, your own way to honor his memory that doesn't involve deception." The gesture sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. Here was a Marine general, the embodiment of military authority and discipline, showing compassion to someone who had committed what many considered an unforgivable offense against military honor. It was a moment that challenged everyone present to think more deeply about justice, forgiveness, and the complex motivations behind human actions. Marcus looked up at the general through his tears and managed to speak. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice stronger now.
"I'm sorry to you, to the Marines, to every veteran here, and to my brother's memory.
I never meant to dishonor anyone. I just wanted to feel like I mattered, like I was worthy of the respect that my brother earned." The general nodded thoughtfully. "Son, you matter because you're David Williams's brother. You matter because you're a human being trying to find his way in the world. You don't need to wear someone else's uniform to have value. Your brother didn't die so you could live his life. He died so you could live your own." The general's words hit Marcus with the force of revelation. For months he had been trying to become someone else, to earn respect through borrowed glory. But the general was right. David would have wanted him to find his own path, not to hide behind a stolen identity. The realization was both liberating and terrifying, as Marcus faced the prospect of rebuilding his life on a foundation of truth rather than lies. The aftermath of Marcus's public confession created a firestorm of conflicting emotions throughout the community. As news of the incident spread beyond the Veterans Day ceremony, local media picked up the story, turning it into a regional sensation. The headlines varied dramatically depending on the publication's perspective. Local man exposed for stolen valor competed with brother of war hero seeks to honor fallen Marine. Marcus returned home that evening to find his mother waiting for him in David's old room. Holding the uniform he had been wearing, Margaret Williams was a small woman who had aged considerably since losing her older son, but her eyes still held the steel determination that had carried her through decades of single parenthood after her husband's death. "How long?" she asked simply, her voice steady but filled with pain. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes as he confessed the entire story, from his first desperate decision to wear the uniform to a job interview, to the months of increasingly elaborate deceptions that followed. His mother listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Marcus finished his confession, Margaret was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Your brother would be heartbroken," she said, her words cutting deeper than any anger could have. "Not because of what you did, but because you felt you needed to become someone else to matter. David spent his whole life trying to build you up, trying to make you see your own worth." The conversation with his mother forced Marcus to confront painful truths about his relationship with his deceased brother. David had always been the successful one, the hero, the son who made their mother proud. Marcus had spent years feeling inadequate in comparison, never realizing that David had actually looked up to him in many ways. Margaret pulled out a box of David's personal effects that she had never shown Marcus before. Inside were letters David had written home from Afghanistan, many of them talking about his younger brother. "He was worried about you," she said, reading from one letter. "He wrote about how smart you were, how creative, how much potential you had. He was planning to help you start your own business when he got home." The revelation that David had believed in him, had plans to help him succeed, made Marcus's deception feel even more tragic. He had been living a lie in honor of a brother who had actually seen his true worth. The irony was devastating, and Marcus realized he had been running from the very qualities that David had admired in him. Over the following days, Marcus faced the legal consequences of his actions. The district attorney's office had to determine whether to press charges for stolen valor, a federal offense that could result in fines and imprisonment. The case attracted attention from veterans' rights groups, some calling for maximum prosecution, while others advocated for understanding and rehabilitation rather than punishment. Marcus's story became a lightning rod for debates about stolen valor laws, military honor, and the complex psychology behind such deceptions. Online forums erupted with arguments about whether his motivations and his brother's genuine heroism should be considered mitigating factors. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had simply wanted to disappear from public view. General Morrison's support proved crucial during this difficult period. The general publicly stated that while Marcus's actions were wrong and illegal, he believed prosecution would serve no constructive purpose. "This young man has already been punished by his own conscience," the general told reporters. "What he needs now is guidance and support to find his own path to meaningful service." The security company where Marcus worked faced a difficult decision about his employment. His supervisor, the former Army sergeant who had hired him based on his supposed military experience, felt personally betrayed by the deception. However, Marcus's actual work performance had been excellent, and several clients had specifically praised his professionalism and dedication. After much deliberation, the company decided to keep Marcus employed, but transferred him to a position that didn't involve any claims of military experience. His new role involved community outreach and crisis intervention, work that allowed him to help people without trading on unearned military credentials. It was a chance for redemption that Marcus knew he didn't deserve but was grateful to receive. The local veterans community remained deeply divided about Marcus's case. Some veterans felt that any form of stolen valor deserved severe punishment, regardless of motivation. They argued that Marcus's deception diminished the sacrifices of real veterans and could not be forgiven simply because of his brother's heroism. However, other veterans, particularly those who had known David personally, took a more nuanced view. They remembered David as someone who would have wanted his brother to find healing and purpose, not punishment and shame. These veterans began reaching out to Marcus, offering support and guidance rather than condemnation. Marcus began attending therapy to address the underlying issues that had led to his deception. His therapist helped him understand that his actions had been driven by deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and a desperate need for belonging and respect. The therapy sessions were painful but necessary, forcing Marcus to confront truths about himself that he had been avoiding for years. One of the most difficult aspects of his recovery was learning to forgive himself. Marcus had always been his own harshest critic, and the public shame of his exposure had amplified his self-loathing. Learning to separate his worth as a person from his past mistakes required a fundamental shift in how he viewed himself and his place in the world. The local American Legion Post, after much debate, decided to allow Marcus to attend meetings as a civilian supporter rather than as a member. This compromise acknowledged both the seriousness of his offense and the reality that he genuinely wanted to honor veterans and contribute to their community. It was a small step toward redemption, but an important one. Marcus also began volunteering with organizations that supported military families, particularly those dealing with grief and loss. His personal experience with losing a military family member, combined with his hard-earned understanding of the temptations that could lead someone astray, made him uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply fulfilling. Marcus found that he could make a real difference in people's lives without pretending to be someone he wasn't. For the first time since David's death, he began to feel like he had a genuine purpose and value that belonged to him alone, not borrowed from his brother's sacrifice. 6 months after his public exposure, Marcus faced a federal court hearing to determine his fate regarding the stolen valor charges. The courtroom was packed with veterans, family members, and media representatives, all waiting to see how the justice system would handle this complex case that had captured national attention. The federal prosecutor, a stern woman named Janet Crawford, argued that stolen valor laws existed for important reasons, and that sympathy for Marcus's circumstances shouldn't override the need for justice. She pointed out that Marcus had benefited materially from his deception, receiving employment, free meals, and other considerations based on fraudulent claims of military service. The defendant's actions, Prosecutor Crawford stated, represent a deliberate and sustained campaign of deception that lasted for months. He didn't make a single mistake in judgment. He made hundreds of calculated decisions to continue lying to veterans, employers, and community members who trusted him. The fact that his brother was a genuine hero makes his deception more offensive, not less. Marcus's court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named Thomas Chen, acknowledged his client's guilt but argued for mercy, based on the unique circumstances of the case. Attorney Chen had spent considerable time with Marcus, coming to understand the complex grief and inadequacy that had driven his actions. "Your Honor," Chen argued, "my client stands before you as a man who has already paid a severe price for his poor judgment. He has lost his reputation, faced public humiliation, and carries guilt that will last a lifetime. He didn't commit these acts out of greed or malice, but out of a misguided attempt to honor his brother's memory and find meaning in his own life." The most dramatic moment of the hearing came when General Morrison took the stand as a character witness. The general's presence in the courtroom commanded immediate respect, and his testimony carried significant weight with both the judge and the spectators. "Your Honor," General Morrison began, "I want to be clear that I do not condone what Mr. Williams did. Stolen valor is a serious offense that diminishes the sacrifices of real veterans. However, I also believe that justice must be tempered with understanding of human nature and individual circumstances." The general went on to describe David Williams's heroism in detail, providing the court with a vivid picture of the sacrifice that had shaped Marcus's worldview. He explained how David had risked his own life to save others, earning decorations for valor that went far beyond what Marcus had even claimed for himself. "Mr. Williams was trying to live up to an impossible standard," the general continued. "His brother was genuinely extraordinary, a Marine who exemplified the very best of our corps. The defendant's actions were wrong, but they came from a place of love and respect for his brother's memory, not from a desire to deceive or harm others." The general's most powerful moment came when he addressed Marcus directly from the witness stand. "Son, your brother didn't save my life so that you could spend yours living in his shadow. He saved my life because that's who he was, someone who believed in protecting others and giving them the chance to fulfill their own potential." Several members of Marcus's community also testified on his behalf, describing the positive work he had been doing since his exposure. His supervisor at the security company spoke about Marcus's excellent performance in his new role, emphasizing his dedication to helping others and his obvious remorse for his past actions. Sarah Jenkins, a military widow who had been helped by Marcus's volunteer work, provided particularly moving testimony. "Mr. Williams helped me navigate the VA system when I was struggling with my husband's death benefits," she told the court. "He never claimed to be a veteran when he was helping me. He was just a man who understood loss and wanted to help. That's the person I know him to be." Marcus himself took the stand, knowing that his words could significantly impact his sentence. He had prepared extensively for this moment, but when the time came, he spoke from the heart rather than from his prepared statement. "Your Honor, I want to start by apologizing to every veteran in this courtroom and around the country," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "What I did was wrong, and there's no excuse for it. I dishonored my brother's memory. I betrayed the trust of people who treated me with kindness and respect, and I violated something sacred about military service." Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand why I did something so stupid and hurtful. I've learned that I was trying to earn respect and belonging in the wrong way. I was so afraid of being nobody that I tried to become somebody else, somebody who had actually earned what I was claiming." The defendant's most powerful moment came when he spoke directly about his brother's influence on his life. "David would be ashamed of what I did, but he would also want me to learn from it and become better. He always believed I had value just as I am. I forgot that for a while, but I'm trying to remember it now." Marcus concluded his testimony by outlining his plans for the future, regardless of the court's decision. He had enrolled in college to study social work, with the goal of helping other military families deal with grief and loss. He had also begun speaking to high school students about the importance of honesty and finding their own path rather than trying to live someone else's life. The judge, an elderly man named Robert Patterson, who had served as a Navy officer during Vietnam, took several minutes to consider his decision. The courtroom was completely silent as everyone waited for the ruling that would determine Marcus's fate. Judge Patterson finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of years of judicial experience. "Mr. Williams, what you did was serious and harmful. Stolen valor laws exist to protect the integrity of military service and the honor of those who have genuinely served our country. Your actions violated that principle in a fundamental way." The judge paused, looking directly at Marcus. "However, this court also recognizes that justice is not always best served by maximum punishment. You have shown genuine remorse. You have taken steps to make amends, and you have the support of the very community you wronged. Most importantly, you are the brother of a genuine American hero." The courtroom held its collective breath as Judge Patterson announced his decision. The ruling would not only determine Marcus's immediate future, but would also set a precedent for how similar cases might be handled in the future. Judge Patterson's decision would become a landmark ruling in stolen valor cases across the country. After careful consideration of all the testimony and evidence, he sentenced Marcus to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service specifically with veterans organizations, and a substantial fine that would be donated to military family support charities. Mr. Williams, the judge explained, this sentence reflects both the seriousness of your offense and the unique circumstances that led to it. Your community service will allow you to make genuine amends to the veteran community you wronged. While your probation will ensure that you continue on the path of rehabilitation, you have already begun. The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions to the sentence. Some veterans felt it was too lenient, while others believed it struck the right balance between justice and mercy. The media coverage focused heavily on the precedent the case might set for future stolen valor prosecutions, particularly those involving family members of genuine heroes. General Morrison approached Marcus after the hearing, extending his hand in a gesture that symbolized both closure and new beginnings. Your real service starts now, son, the general told him. You have a chance to honor your brother's memory in the right way. Don't waste it. Marcus's community service assignment placed him at the local VA hospital, where he worked with wounded veterans and military families struggling with various challenges. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now serving the very community he had deceived. But the work felt like genuine penance rather than punishment. At the VA hospital, Marcus met veterans dealing with physical injuries, PTSD, depression, and the countless challenges of transitioning back to civilian life. Many of them initially viewed him with suspicion when they learned about his background, but his sincere dedication to helping them gradually earned their trust and respect. One particularly meaningful relationship developed with a young Marine named Tommy Rodriguez, who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. Tommy was struggling with depression and survivor's guilt, feeling that his life had no purpose now that his military career was over. Marcus shared his own story with Tommy, explaining how he had felt worthless after David's death and had made terrible decisions trying to find meaning and respect. The conversation helped Tommy understand that his value as a person wasn't dependent on his physical capabilities or his military status. You're still the same Marine who served with honor, Marcus told Tommy during one of their many conversations. Your injuries don't change that. Just like my mistakes don't erase my brother's heroism. We both have to find new ways to serve, but we both still matter. The relationship with Tommy became a turning point for Marcus's understanding of true service. He realized that helping one person find hope and purpose was more meaningful than all the false respect he had received while wearing a stolen uniform. This was the kind of impact David would have wanted him to have. Marcus's mother, Margaret, watched her son's transformation with a mixture of pride and sadness. She was proud of the man he was becoming, but sad that it had taken such a painful experience to get him there. She began attending some of his court-ordered counseling sessions, helping both of them heal from the complex grief and family dynamics that had contributed to his deception. David always said you had the biggest heart in the family, Margaret told Marcus one evening as they looked through photo albums. He would be proud of what you're doing now, even though he would still be disappointed in how you got here. Marcus completed his college degree in social work while fulfilling his community service requirements. His professors initially questioned whether someone with his background should be working in a field that required trust and integrity, but his volunteer work at the VA hospital provided compelling evidence of his commitment to positive change. His senior thesis focused on the psychological factors that lead to stolen valor cases. Drawing from his own experience and extensive research into similar cases, the paper was later published in a social work journal and became required reading in several military psychology programs. General Morrison stayed in touch with Marcus throughout his probation period, serving as both a mentor and a connection to his brother's military legacy. The general helped Marcus understand that honoring David's memory didn't require becoming David, but rather living up to the values David had embodied: integrity, service to others, and courage in the face of adversity. 3 years after his court hearing, Marcus received a phone call that changed his perspective on his entire experience. A young man named Kevin Patterson called to thank him for a speech Marcus had given at a high school about the importance of honesty and finding your own path in life. Kevin explained that he had been planning to drop out of school and enlist in the military using fake documents because He felt like a failure compared to his older brother, who was a Navy SEAL. Marcus's story about trying to live up to an impossible standard had convinced him to stay in school and find his own way to serve his community. "You probably saved my life," Kevin told Marcus. "I was about to make a huge mistake because I thought I wasn't good enough as myself. Your story showed me that trying to be someone else just makes everything worse." The phone call helped Marcus realize that his painful experience had given him a unique ability to help others avoid similar mistakes. His public shame had become a source of wisdom that could genuinely help people, particularly young men struggling with feelings of inadequacy and the pressure to live up to heroic family members. Marcus eventually established a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of fallen service members, particularly siblings who struggled with survivor's guilt and feelings of inadequacy. The organization provided counseling, educational support, and mentorship programs designed to help family members find their own paths to meaningful service. On the 5th anniversary of his exposure, Marcus returned to the same civic center where his deception had been revealed. This time, he was there as an invited speaker for a Veterans Day ceremony, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the importance of integrity and the danger of trying to earn respect through deception. Standing at the same podium where his world had collapsed, Marcus looked out at an audience that included many of the same veterans who had witnessed his humiliation years earlier. This time, however, he was wearing his own clothes and speaking his own truth. "I dishonored this uniform," Marcus said, gesturing to a display case containing David's actual decorations, which had been donated to the local Veterans Museum. "But more importantly, I dishonored myself by believing that I wasn't worthy of respect unless I pretended to be someone else. My brother died believing in my potential. It took me too long to believe in it myself." Marcus concluded his speech with a message that had become his life's mission. Real honor comes from serving others as yourself, not from pretending to be someone you're not. My brother was a hero because he was willing to sacrifice for others. I'm trying to honor his memory by doing the same thing in my own way, as myself. The audience gave Marcus a standing ovation, not for stolen valor or borrowed glory, but for the courage to face his mistakes and transform them into something meaningful. It was the kind of respect he had always wanted, earned through his own actions, built on a foundation of truth, and dedicated to serving others rather than serving himself. General Morrison, now retired but still attending the annual ceremony, approached Marcus afterward with a smile. "Your brother would be proud," the general said simply, "not of what you went through, but of who you've become because of it. That's the real tattoo that matters, the mark that experience leaves on your character." Marcus nodded, finally understanding what the general meant. The small tattoo on his neck would always remind him of David's sacrifice, but the invisible mark left by his own journey, from deception to redemption, from shame to service, was what truly honored his brother's memory and gave meaning to his own life.